came up with it, but after all these years, it's what I'm known for, so I stick with it, and it's unique. So that's why.
So you are a cartographer,
Mm-hmm.
and you make maps, and we've been talking all about maps, and it's so exciting to have a professional come into our classroom and talk about your process and how you got to where you are, and just show us like some of the maps that you've made. So
Mm-hmm.
we would just love to like hear your brain. So you could.
Well, but before I sort of go into my presentation, it's been interesting listening to everyone talk about the maps, thinking about what maps they're going to make. And whenever I sit down to make a new map, it's always difficult to get started. Primarily, I deal with transportations in cities because that's where my interest is, which helps get me focused. I deal with mostly real world places. I mean, real cities, but there's plenty of people out there that work on fantasy. That's just not my area of interest. But there's so much great work out there online that people share. I want to share one early map I made, just to give people an idea, because this map isn't. Hold on a second. Can you see it? Yeah, this isn't like an extraordinary map or anything like that, but it was an early attempt at me to figure out something to map where it was not my weekly routine, like where I was going out, where I was going to school, where I was seeing friends and stuff. And so just you don't have to copy this or anything, but just as an idea, how you could make a map of something that isn't that obvious. And I chose to do it looking like a subway map. So. I don't know if that helps anyone. I hope so. So let me start out. I don't know exactly what you've learned so far about what cartography is, but to me, it's a pretty simple idea that has like large possibilities. Cartography is the art and science of making maps. It's a visual representation of a geographic place. And what you do as a cartographer is choose how to describe or communicate a place based on what you show. You're using the art element by choosing different ways to draw, different ways to show what's there. You have to be able to draw things so they're clear to understand. So people, when they use the map and they look at it, one thing that your teacher, I remember in her presentation, said was it's important to have a key, which is true. But if you design a map very well, you almost don't need a key. The elements themselves are sort of self-evident. That's not always going to be the case, but if you're a really good designer, that's what you should be aiming for. And then the science aspect is maps need to be drawn to a certain scale so everything relates to one another so that you can properly, get from point A to point B. That's what really defines a map, as opposed to, say, like a diagram. And the big difference is, if you look at the subway, the map that we're all accustomed to seeing of the subway isn't actually a map. It's technically a diagram because it's not geographically accurate. And we'll get into that in a second. So let me here we go. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have been a cartographer. I started out just as a hobbyist, and at some point I transitioned into, I call myself a semi-professional, but I am a professional cartographer. I've been doing it for 17 years. I was born in upstate New York, and I moved to Boston when I was a teenager, and I've now lived in New York City for over 15 years. My website is vanschnuckenragen.com, or if you want it shortened, vanmaps.com. Another project that I am working with, I'm the Vice President and Chief Design Officer for Queens Link, which is a nonprofit in central and southern Queens. We have been advocating for the restoration of an abandoned rail line throughout central Queens to return to service. And that it really isn't like the point of this talk, but if anybody's interested, I can talk about it too. My educational background, I studied industrial design at the Wentworth Institute of Technology in Boston. I transferred to CUNY Hunter, and I got my bachelor's in geography. I had also planned on getting my master's in urban planning. I decided to not go about that for a variety of reasons. Mostly I was sick of going to school, but in the meantime, I'm also become a transit activist and historian, and it's to get down to it, the core of the idea. The reason I make maps is to illustrate the information that I've researched or the topic that I want to talk about. So this is one of the first maps I made. It's a fantasy subway system in Boston based on the real thing. Basically, like I had said, I had been trying to research the subway when I first went to college in Boston. I was 18. I'd never lived in a city that had a subway before. I know you guys in New York take it for granted, but you know, it's a big deal for other places. And I was just fascinated by this, that I could just get on a train and go somewhere. And so I decided to start researching it. And this is going back almost 20 years. And 20 years ago, you know, the internet was not what it is today. There was so much information that wasn't online, or if it was online, like if there was images online, they were very low resolution. Maps were very hard to find. So the information that I was finding described the history of the system, the history of the city, but it also talked about subway lines that hadn't ever been built, or subway lines that used to exist and got ripped down for some reason. So naturally in my head, I started to try and make a map of it. And I searched to see if I could find a map in real life. Now those maps existed. They were in libraries, in physical libraries that you would have to go to. Luckily, being in Boston, there's a lot of schools. I was able to find some, but I still had this map in my head, and I still wasn't finding in the real world what I really wanted to see, which was the existing map of the system with all these expansions. And finally, I just decided that if I couldn't find it, I was going to have to make it myself. And I had very rudimentary Photoshop skills. And I basically sat down with the map and I just started drawing on it. I didn't know what I was doing. I had never taken a class on how to do this, but that's how I got started. I just started trying things out. And I would, if you're wanting to learn how to draw a map, I would say copying other maps is probably a great way to get started. I know it's how painters, you know, get started. They'll copy a master's work. Because at the very least, it'll show you the basics of how to A, draw, and then B, where to put things, how things are oriented. And so when I got started, I was completely self-taught, and it was just trial and error, and I didn't really know what I was doing. But that's fine. When you're getting starting out, you shouldn't let that stop you. And what I would then do is go online and share my work on internet forums. This is before social media. And I got a lot of good feedback. And so that encouraged me to keep making more maps and trying things out. Now, eventually, I learned better techniques. I learned better programs to use through this whole journey. I began looking at other maps and saying, like, all right, what are they doing that I'm not doing? The big difference between this map and this map is that this map here is a raster file. And if you zoom in, you can see it's very low res. There's all these pixels that aren't very clear. Rasters are files that deal with individual pixels. And this is digital. And they're very good for like photography, but if you want a map, you really want to use a vector program. Now, if you zoom in here, you can see the lines are much smoother. You can do more precise drawing with it. Vectors, you're not drawing pixels, you're drawing lines that are described in math equations to the computer. And so that way you can adjust them on the fly much easily. You can scale things very quickly. It just makes for a cleaner map. It also makes for a smaller file. So that makes, when you start making a big map, that makes things easy because they're smaller. So at this time I dropped out of college. I was looking for something to do, to go back to school for. And I just thought to myself, what's something that I could do in school and be so passionate about that there's no way I could fail? And I thought, I like maps, so I'll study geography. And that got me basically, and that ended up with me moving to New York City to go to Hunter because they have a very good geography program. Again, this was all just a hobby. I wasn't taking it very seriously, but it was fun for me to explore the history of the city. And when I moved to New York, I had this brand new city, and now I had a new way of educating myself about it. And so I was also doing other things, like I was a photographer as well. And so I decided to not make a map of New York at first, because I actually found New York very overwhelming. I remember the first time I saw the New York City subway map, and I just couldn't comprehend that someone could use it and understand it. And so I just set out, and I would literally just walk around or bike around places in the city, and in my head I was creating a mental map. And I would take pictures and I would document where I went. I would explore a lot of abandoned buildings. I would use Google Maps to find places that didn't seem like people went there. Maybe they seemed abandoned, or they just seemed interesting to me, and I would go there and figure out what they were. And this is, I think, another important aspect of making a map is, if you really want it to be accurate, you have to either go to a place or understand the place for what it is, because you can't describe something you've never seen. And I think that's what helped me in the maps that I've made in the past, is I have been to these places, and just seeing, it's hard to describe why sometimes, but like sometimes just seeing a place, it all makes sense. And then when you can go back and when you make your map of that place, you're making it with more confidence and more understanding. And so that map is then going to be more accurate. So I was in New York, and I started researching the city, and I found out about this guy, Robert Moses, who had wanted to build highways everywhere. And that got me interested into what that would have looked like. And so at the time, Google Maps had just come out. Not just come out, but it had been out. And I realized as a cartographer, it was changing the way that a normal person interacts with a map. I grew up at the time when, if you had maps, you literally had paper maps that you had to unfold, or you had books of them. I loved going on like long vacations and following where we were going in the map. But as digital maps got better to understand, like Google Maps, I realized this is how everyone is going to start interacting with the world. And that interests me as an artist, because I realized, oh, we could start finding like a gray zone here. We could start using something like Google Maps, but drawn in the style of Google Maps, to describe something that isn't real, right? And so that got me thinking about how to draw these highway maps in the style of Google Maps. So what you're seeing here is probably Robert Moses' most famous highway he never got to build, the Lower Manhattan Expressway, which would have cut across Delancey Street to the west side. If you've heard of a woman named Jane Jacobs, she was instrumental in getting this blocked. It's a whole fascinating history of New York City, and it really would have changed how downtown acts as a city completely if this highway had been built there. And I wanted to really show people just how destructive this would have been. So going back quickly to the first slide, which talked about the art and the science of maps, the art of a map is that you can show certain things, but that also means that you can not show certain things. And there's a famous sort of idea as to how to lie with maps, which is how to sell someone an idea with a map because you're not showing them something. And early highway maps that were going through cities didn't show the destruction that these highways would bring. They just showed how quick it would be to drive across the city. And what I wanted to do with this is say, all right, now we've got these detailed maps of the city. Let's show what it would have really been like. And what was interesting when I made this map is if you look really closely, you'll see all the building outlines are there. Well, when I made this map, I had to physically go through and erase these buildings. And I almost had a personal connection to these buildings, even though I've never been inside them, but I've walked down these streets. And when I would like go down to Broome Street as I was making this map, I could look at these buildings and realize, oh, like this would have been gone. And it was a very interesting experience to just draw the map. And I hope that other people sort of get that aspect out of it, beyond the fact of just, oh, hey, there's an expressway in Lower Manhattan. But that sort of got me, this is what got me into more geographic maps. Before I was just doing diagrams. And much like with the unbuilt highways of New York, as I like to call them, there were also a lot of subway lines that had been proposed to be built all throughout the city. And this is probably what I'm most known for. It's the project that I've spent the most time on. I had researched as much of the past subway expansion proposals as I could, and I decided to write a whole blog series on it, and I decided to make maps for it. And this got me, what you're seeing here is a geographic representation of the subway, but also with these dotted lines, unbuilt lines or proposed lines. This got me thinking about where could new lines go? And so I started thinking about the city in a whole different way, going to places saying, like, would a subway line work here? And I used my cartography experience to document this. This is, like I said, this is what I'm most known for, is just explaining to people clearly this sort of complex history of the city. And so, but again, this was all just like a real nerdy hobby. And this is probably as far as I got. But you'll notice these lines, like I said, these are vector lines. And so what I could do with them is take them and do something else with them. This is basically data. And as I was making these maps, I realized, you know what, like these look cool on their own. I had seen, I'd never sold my work before, but I had seen people who had sold maps, and I just said, you know what, I think I have something I can do. And so I took just all these vectors and I made a poster series. And I made each subway line into a poster. I had no idea what I was doing. I just went onto some website where you could print out your art and put it up for sale. But I decided to say, all right, I like these lines. I think they work as art because these lines look interesting to me. And what I did with the posters was put a little history there, put some information, and the MTA shut me down because the MTA likes to control all their copyrighted material. I was able to get a contract with them to sell these maps, so I have to pay them royalties on these posters. This isn't a lot, but that got me thinking, okay, how do I turn this into a business now? And I never thought about that. And that's when I shifted from just a hobbyist to a professional, because then I had to learn business. I had to learn budgeting. I had to figure out how to market myself. I had to make a website with a store, all these things. I would say I was lucky because I had Kickstarter. I had created a Kickstarter and it blew up overnight. I don't know how or why, doesn't matter. And I was able to make all the sales, the pre-sales I needed to. And it was funny because I still didn't know what I was doing. So when it came time to mailing everything out, I actually ran out of money because I didn't budget myself properly. But it allowed me to start a business. And then through that business, I've been able to shift what I was doing in terms of like, all right, if I'm going to make a map of something, well, why don't I make a poster of it too? And so then that encouraged me to make my maps a little bit more professional. It encouraged me to think about how I was going to make my maps off the bat in a more structured way. It wasn't just staring at a blank canvas saying, what am I going to do here? It really gave me the structure, which is, I think, really important as an artist, because I think as artists, we don't like all that much structure, but we actually do need a fair amount of structure to get get your work done. Let's see. This is a more recent one I made. You can see sort of the quality's gone up a little bit. This is I think this map is a perfect sort of encapsulation of sort of my interests as a designer and a historian. When they built one of the subway lines, the ACE, the BDF, they in the stations they designed a color scheme so you could tell where you are, and that was like a esoteric piece of history that I don't think most people ever noticed, but I knew about it. So I said, all right, let me make a map of that, and I got a little creative with it. If you zoom up here, you can see all these like this tile work. I just had fun with it, and this has been one of the most popular maps I've made. And I don't think that much of it, honestly. It's not that interesting outside of what it is, but it just goes to show that you can never tell what your audience is going to think of your work. And as long as you put yourself into it, you're doing something that you are interested in making, it'll connect with other people. So those are the little things that I've been doing. And I hit a point where this wasn't like not going anywhere, but it wasn't growing into any more of an interesting direction than I had hoped. So I decided to take a step back, and I just thought, there's something about the New York City subway map which isn't telling me what I want it to tell me. I'm interested in understanding how the system really works, where the tracks are, where the abandoned stations are. And that led me to create this here, which is a full-scale, geographically accurate map of the subway. You'll have to zoom in very far to see everything. And so what I did here was, I decided to take everything that I had ever learned about the subway. And I'm talking about like 10 years of research of different maps and visiting places, and try to draw what the subway really looks like. The subway is a train system, and on train systems, you have tracks, you have switches, you have platforms. And through this map, I was trying to educate people how and why trains go where they do. So why, the 6 train doesn't go on the F line, because those tracks don't intersect. And that I also wanted to understand let me see if I can find, here we go. Like downtown, all these gray lines are abandoned platforms. And I wanted to show those because people don't know that they're there, or maybe they've heard they're there, but they don't know where they are. And then educate people, like over here, there's some other, unused tunnels. And so I really just wanted to draw the system for what it was. And, this wouldn't work as a map on the subway, because it's not trying to tell you how to get from point A to point B. It's describing something else entirely. And I think that's an important thing when you're making a map, is like, what are you trying to communicate? Here, I'm trying to communicate the technical details of the system, which doesn't help you if you're just trying to get to Times Square. But this map, I recently finished the map of Chicago. This is what I've spent all year doing. These maps take a lot more work. The New York map, I said I'd had about 10 years of research into it just because I'd lived here for that long. This map of Chicago, which I just finished, I've never lived in Chicago. I've only been there a couple times. And so drawing this map while researching it at the same time was time consuming and exhausting, because I didn't really know what I was looking at, and I had to learn, and I just had to crunch over about 2 years. But it helped. It allowed me to do the thing I want to do the most, which is to understand a place. Through that research, I can translate everything I've read in my head into a map, and then I I spit this out. And this is basically what I've got in my head, but I just need it, in one place. And so these maps, the Chicago one, I've got one in Boston, the New York one, these have really, to turn a phrase, put me on the map as an artist, because I think people just didn't realize just what was out there in their own city. Most people don't ever have to think about, like, oh, do we need this siding track in Sunnyside Yard? Like, no, that's not ever going to affect you. But if you want to understand your city, you have to understand that there are systems involved, and this is one of them. And so I think what's made me connect with people as an artist is that I'm able to take something as complex as the subway system and draw it in a way which is clear. I use solid colors, clean lines. I describe myself as a minimalist, even though this is pretty involved. It's pretty minimalism. I'm minimalist. There's not much going on in terms of the design elements here. There's just a lot of them, and so that I think it speaks to the need for visual communication in what you're doing and how you're telling a story. Let me see what else. So that's sort of where I am now. I just sell these online. Social media is a terrible thing, but it's great for artists. When I started out, it was still, if you wanted to be an artist, you had to know people, and social media has lowered that bar. What I would recommend, especially with social media, is even if you don't think your art is very good, share it, because A, you don't know that it's not very good. B, other people don't know that it's not very good, and so they're actually going to think that it is good, and that's going to help you gain confidence. And C, it's also going to get your name out there. And when you do that, you're going to meet other artists who are going to inspire you to want to do things. And it's also going to inspire you to be a better artist yourself, because it's going to challenge you. You're going to say, oh, okay, well, here's this other thing I always wanted to do, or here's something I didn't know about at all, and I'm interested in doing that. It could be photography, painting, drawing, collage, whatever. So it's the more you put yourself out there, the more you get back. And there's also criticism, and that's okay. You'll learn how to take that. But I think the number one takeaway is just don't hold yourself back as much as you normally would, which I've learned that the hard way. It's tough. Self-criticism is, you have to learn how to filter that out and just push yourself. Let's see here. I'm going to see what else I've got left. There's another thing I briefly touched on. I just want to bring up as a last major point, as something that I was never taught, and I wish people had taught me, which was, if you're going to be an artist, it's not enough to be creative. You have to learn how to be a business. You have to learn how to sell yourself. Otherwise, there's plenty of creative people out there, some of the most creative people in the world, and you'll never hear them. You'll never see their art because they didn't know how to put themselves out there. And it's scary, but it's also difficult, because if you're trying to make money, you're trying to live off of your creativity, you're not taught how to do that. And so I would recommend, as you get older, if you want to be serious about this, depending on sort of what avenue you want to go into, but it might be helpful for anyone, just take a business course, because you have to reposition how you think about yourself as not just a creative person, but you are now a creative, a creator, and creators must create. You have to learn how to manage your work time. This map of Chicago, for instance, there were days when I would just open this up and just stare at it for hours, and I would just force myself to make one change, just so I kept on schedule, just so I felt good about myself, because there's, you don't feel that creative urge every day. And then other days I would go 10 hours. I wouldn't eat lunch. I would just be like, oh, I got all this done. It's about managing that. And then when it comes time to selling yourself or selling your art, you really, and this is difficult. What this next thing is very difficult. It's difficult for everyone. It's called valuing your worth. Um, and I would say, I think we all undervalue ourselves, especially if no one has ever given you a value, given your art a value. And what's funny about art is, as the artist, we are the ones that dictate what our value is. So I can say, all right, I'm selling this map for $300, and no one's going to question it. And if they do, you can just say, all right, it's $300 because I say it is. Now, it's $300 because of a lot of different factors, such as what it costs to produce it, print it, all that type of thing, and ship it. But if I had said this map was $1,000 when I printed it out, that would be setting myself up to sell fewer maps, but it might also set me up to sell them to more serious buyers, people who have more money, people that are more interested in the art world. I have some clients I met, and they, they're not like the richest people you ever met, but they love art. They're artists themselves, and they're one. I made them a big custom map, and they said, yeah, whatever you want, we'll pay for it. And because they understand the value of it. And then whenever they invite people over to their house, my map is hanging on the wall and everybody talks about it. So if I had, undersold myself or said it wasn't good enough, none of that would have happened. But valuing yourself is something that I think takes time to learn the confidence of how to do that. Um, it's it's hard when you don't know, like you just made something, you're like, all right, this is what it is, and someone says, how much do you want for it? Just like, I have no idea, man. This doesn't cost me anything. But you have to understand that you are creating that market, and if you want to make a lot of money, you want to be one of these crazy artists that are rich, because most aren't. Like, you have to understand that aspect of it. But then you also have to understand how to connect to those people. If you want to charge a lot of money, you got to network and meet the people that are willing to pay that. So the whole business aspect of it is something that they never tell you. Most people have to learn on their own. Or I would hazard to guess probably the most famous artists or the most wealthy artists, I should say, are probably people that were wealthy in the first place. So if you learn the business aspect of it, you'll be set. Now, when it comes to working for other things, working for a company as a designer, working with clients, I have chosen to not do that, just because I don't like the way it limits me. But that is a whole other discussion. That's a whole other avenue to go down to. I know I have a lot of friends that are graphic designers or something like that, that work for companies, and it has its challenges. I'm lucky enough to where I can make the maps that I want to make, and people respond positively to them, and I don't have to work with clients. If I did, if I was working with clients, I'd probably be better off financially, but hey, I'm happy, and I think that's what's important. So um, that's, yeah, that would be my major takeaway is learn. It's not enough to be a good creative person. You have to learn how to channel that. Um, but through proper channeling, you're going to be a better artist, because you're going to meet people that are going to inspire you more. You're going to get your work out there. You're going to want to have better products, better art. And so it doesn't have to be this like, oh, am I selling out? Like, it's not selling out. um, it's how to be a real artist. And so um, yeah, that would be my most, anyone can be a hobby artist. That's what I was for most of my time. But learning how to transition into a professional artist, that's pure business. And I would definitely recommend, even just an introductory one. If it's not for you, that's fine. But just to understand, because you have to think differently. But you have to be able to think as a creative person and as a business person. So yeah, that's my that's my 2 cents on the matter.
Um, that's such great information. Thank you so much. Andrew. A lot of students were asking some really great questions in the chat, and I would love for them to ask you the question. Spencer, are you still here? Do you want to ask your question first?
I am still here, yeah. So I was wondering, you said earlier you were an advocate of sorts in terms of mapping, and I wanted to know what that meant, and especially in terms of like, now working. I guess you said you're kind of working with clients, but mostly, doing what you want. So what does that mean in terms of like advocacy? I guess is what I'm wondering.
Hold on, so I am not, to clarify, I'm not a map advocate, although I love maps. I guess I'm a map advocate because I always think in maps, but that's not what I meant. I'm a transit activist. The reason that I've made the maps that I make is because I'm trying to describe something. I am trying to educate people on how the system works, the problems with the system, the problems with transportation in big cities like New York. And as a visual person myself, I love having maps. I love seeing pictures of things to understand them. It's just literally how my brain works. And so if I'm going to talk about anything, I need to have a map about it. My advocacy has been online for the most part, in terms of, like I said, educating people, such as the track map, to educate people how the system works. So when people would have questions, why does this train run over here? I could say, oh, it's because of this, and this is the work they're doing, and here's a map that really describes it, and not just this little diagram that you see, on the MTA's website or something. And I also I tried going around talking to politicians about how to improve service. The MTA is a multi-headed bureaucracy beast. But at the same time, I've been told that I have more power to change minds on the outside than I would if I was on the inside. And that led me to working with this nonprofit out in Queens, which we are, it's an abandoned rail line that runs north-south through Queens. And we said, this could be turned into a subway, it could be turned into a park. And I spent 2 years working on this proposal. We released it back in October of 2019. We were setting ourselves up for fundraising for this year and coalition building. Basically, we were trying to go around to organizations, nonprofits, people in central and southern Queens who don't really even care, but saying like, this is how this project will improve your life, and this is how it will improve subway service. It'll shorten your commute, allow you to go places that you didn't go before. COVID has, put us on the back burner, obviously, like so many things, but it was still an eye-opening project. And it got me interested in doing more with public policy in terms of transportation. Before, it was sort of, I saw myself as more of an educator, and now I'm interested in more action. And so I'm considering going either back to college, getting a master's in something, or over this next year, working with one of the mayoral candidates for transportation. I haven't decided yet, but it is, in terms of advocacy, all I can do is sort of talk about what I'm passionate about and do so in clear ways so people really understand the problems that we face and the potential solutions. Because I think one of the big issues, most people that don't understand the subways, is they just look at it and say, oh, the service is terrible, they're not running overnight, all these issues. Whereas I can come in, because I've studied these details, I can show them in really clear, pretty pictures, like, no, like this is what's possible, like we could have it better. And so that's really what my aim is to do with the advocacy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Christopher, what's your question?
Well, to be honest, I just kind of had more of a curious question, I guess. And I'm just wondering, if you had to design a city from the ground up, where would you start and why?
I have played more hours of SimCity than I am ever comfortable admitting to. And what I discovered through that is, if you look at human history, there are certain things that we as animals need: water, food source, something like that. And I guess if I was going to design a city from the ground up, I would be choosing a place that solved a problem. I guess what I mean by that is, since we've sort of evolved in our society, it's like, why is there a city there in the first place? So many cities, they're not just on rivers or bodies of water for that water source, but they're also there because that is a point where people had to change transportation modes. They had to go from a boat onto land. And when you do that, you have to stop, you have to get off, you have to eat. And that allowed a city to grow, that allowed services to grow. People got off and said, all right, we'll live here. This is nice. Or we'll build a farm. Or a farmer was there and said, all right, here are new customers for my crops. And so, yeah, as a seed for a new city, it could honestly be anything you want, but it's got to solve a problem. And then off of that, you can build all the other things that you need to do. You look at like out west, these cities like Denver, they were built on gold mines, or cities that popped up because of oil. New York was here because of our harbor. And then when we were able to build the Erie Canal, we were able to harness all of the production of the Midwest through New York, as opposed to Boston or Philadelphia. And that's why New York is New York and those other cities aren't. So it's cities are so fascinating because really cities are just about people. They're not about the buildings or the subways or roads. They're just about people needing to do something. And so, yeah, if you're going to start a city anywhere, you got to have a reason for people to do something. You just pick whatever reason it is. It could be the most insane reason ever, because that would be more fun if you're making a fantasy map. Just, all right, like we liked the color purple and there's a field of purple here, so we made a city. Like, doesn't matter.
Sorry, I keep forgetting to unmute myself. Isaiah, are you still here? Did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I was just wondering, as someone in the industry of map making, would you say that Google Maps is like a competitor to you because people have
Well, I'm sorry, let me continue.
but yeah, would you say they're competition or
Not at all, not at all. The tough part with mapping, with cartography, is you can do almost anything. And I can't tell you how often people come up to me and say, oh, did you ever make a map of this, this, and this? And it's just no, I didn't, because I never thought about it, and I wouldn't because I'm not interested in, and because at some point you have to just pick something and go with it, because otherwise it'll be so overwhelming. I think Google Maps is the most important mapping tool, of the 21st century, for sure. And probably the second or third most important mapping tool of the 20th century. I'd say it's probably second behind, not GIS. GIS would be second, and before that, number one would be what the tracking with the satellites. What do you call that? Sorry, you know what I'm talking about. Yes, and so Google Maps has the ability to do something that no maps before ever had, which is it can be dynamic. If you were to make a map that showed everything in the world as it existed, it would be illegible. It would have to be so big that it would be as big as the world itself, so you couldn't see it, or it'd be so small that you just couldn't read anything. Now, the brilliance of Google Maps now is as you zoom in at different scales, the different information shows up, and you can also choose what to show, what you want, and you can add to it. So especially right now, a lot of restaurants are closing. And so you could walk by and say, oh, that restaurant's closed. I can go on Google Maps and tell them that it's closed. So you've got this crowdsourcing aspect to it. I honestly, I wouldn't be able to do the maps I make now because if it wasn't for Google Maps. Just everything I wanted to know is there. And if the things that aren't there, I have the ability to add that. If I was trying to make Bing or Apple Maps or something, yeah, okay, Google would be a competitor. But for what I do, it's the fact that it's free is insane. It's just the maps I would be making would take 10 times as long if it wasn't for Google Maps, or I wouldn't even try because it just wouldn't be possible. So no, I think it's the best thing since sliced bread. Who's next?
Thank you so much. Anybody else have any questions?
I have a question.
Mhm.
Since there's lots of problems with New York transportation, are there any places you look for as like examples of good systems?
That's a great question. It's a question that I think everybody in transportation talks about, best practices. What I have discovered is no place is perfect. Every place does something well, good enough. You know, like people, it's hard for us to living in New York and living with the subway system because we see the flaws. But coming from outside, you know, we have some of the best transit coverage of any city, not just in North America, but absolutely North America, but in the world. And it also, before COVID and hopefully after COVID, runs all the time, 24 hours a day. Almost no cities do that. When I started traveling when I was a bit younger, I mean, I knew Boston didn't do that, but then I went to like Chicago. London doesn't do that. Like they might have a couple lines that do that, but it's a really New York thing. But the downsides to that are that that's less time for maintenance, and that's one of the reasons why our system is in such disrepair. Is we just don't have enough time to maintain everything. It's also a little bit overbuilt. It was 3 competing companies. If you were going to start from scratch, you probably wouldn't build as much, or you build them in different places. But there is always something to learn. I think the biggest thing, the biggest problem in New York is that New Yorkers think New York is the best place in the world. And as I say that as a New Yorker who thinks New York's the best place in the world. That means that we don't look to other places to say, what are they doing differently? I'll give you an example. So I went to Germany when I was in college, and like most places in Europe, everybody takes transportation. And the bus, I took the bus a lot. The bus has this very interesting design where it looks just like a bus that we would have. But when you walk in the front, there's a one-way gate. It's just a little swing open. So you can enter the front, but you can't go out the front. You have to go out the back. And I just looked at that and I just said, that would speed everything up. All the people that get on the bus and then they get off the front and all the people are waiting. If everyone just got off on the back and got on the front, that would speed everything up. But like trying to like bring that to New York, no, New Yorkers wouldn't want to do that. We'd have to change how we do things. It's just like, you know, people aren't that stubborn, despite the fact that we tend to want to be. It's like if you can prove someone that their life will be better, even if it's a little thing, they'll change. But unless they see it with their eyes, they're not going to believe you. And so it's what would help, I think, in New York is if our leaders would take the time to travel around and say, oh, like, okay, we could have a bus lane that works, or we could have bike lanes that aren't blocked by the cops. Like we could have all these little things. It's not impossible here. We're choosing to say it's impossible because we're not taking the time to see the right way to do it. So there's so much to learn. But like I was saying before, there are people that come to New York that don't have anything close to what we have. I met a guy, he was doing a bus redesign from New Orleans, and you know, they had like 3 bus lines. This is after Hurricane Katrina or something like that. It was, you looked at it, you're just like, what? Like even the buses here, they're terrible, but I can still get a bus. And there's other cities in America, they don't even have buses, or if they have 1 bus and it runs every hour or something like that. So the better education is the key, better communication in terms of like how everyone is doing things. What's nice about the internet and what's nice about Zoom calls like this is we're flattening the globe. So it's easier for people to see that there are things that can be done that aren't going to change, you don't need to change the world. You just make it a little bit better. So.
Awesome, thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
Oh, I actually had one. Do you have any suggestions when we're building our maps?
Yes. What I would say for me, and I think for anyone who's creative, the most difficult part is starting. When you're staring at a blank screen, and you don't have an idea, or even if you have an idea but you don't know where to start. It seems like you're standing at the bottom of a mountain, being like, I got to get it up there. Take everything one step at a time. Literally start with a line, a dot. Just say, okay, I want to draw a map of my neighborhood. Start with your house or your apartment. Start with, I don't know, your favorite restaurant or your favorite store or something like that. Just start. Literally doesn't matter what it is. The second that there's something on the paper, on the page, then your creative juices are going to start taking you where you need to go. This big map I made of New York, this one, here we go. This one here, like this map, I started with these two lines, with this line right here. I was staring at this map. I'm like, how am I going to draw a map of the subway? Like a map of the city. I've never drawn anything this big. It just seemed impossible. So I just said, all right, I'm going to start somewhere. And I just started here and it just flowed from there. And it's not that it was easy, but once it started, all the challenges that you have in your head become broken up, and you say, all right, well, now I have to show this over here. How do I do that? Now I have to do this thing over here. How do I do that? So yeah, don't look at it as one big thing. Look at it as a million little things that are really easy to do, really easy to overcome. And that I would just say as an artist in general, getting started. And it's okay to jot down, like start working on another area, stop working over here, start working over here. Understand that anything creative is a process and a journey. And part of the fun of that journey is finding new challenges to overcome, because that means you're going to learn a new technique. You're going to learn a new visual trick. You're going to learn something. I love learning. That's literally why I do this. And I like to share what I've learned through this. So for you, it should be, it almost doesn't matter what you have at the end. It's about finding the map that already exists. It's sort of like with sculptors is, that work of art is in the piece of wood, or it's in the granite, it's in whatever they're using, and they have to figure out how to get it out. And they're not going to just start, hacking off big pieces to just try to get through and do it. They're going to work it. They're going to feel out, that medium. And you should do the same thing as a map. You should do it as an artist. Because so many times you'll draw something. Oh wait, I just realized this is bad. This isn't how I want it, and erase it or throw it out and go back. So understand that that's part of the process. Don't let that frustrate you. And every time that you come to something you don't understand how to do, either talk to people, research it, or just play around and see, just try new things, because so much of the best work in the world was made by accident. Was made by some, you weren't even trying. It was just all right. Or like penicillin the guy forgot to throw out the beaker at the end of the night, and he comes back and he discovered something that has saved humanity. Like little things like that. I'm not saying my maps are penicillin, but as an artist, when you come to challenges like that, let your creativity take control, and don't be afraid. And yeah, just see where it takes you, because I think the truth is, if you're making a piece of art that already exists, it's just about how is it going to come through you as a middle person, to be present in the world, and that's like that's what your job is as an artist. It's like you're not even creating the map. You're just making it real. It's already exists. It's already in your head. It's already somewhere. And it's finding the ways to let it out of you, basically. So let that be the fun part.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Does anybody else have any questions? Otherwise, I think we've taken up a lot of time here. Anyone? Okay, so if you are one of my students, I will see you on Tuesday, if not at tomorrow's office hours. So all classes are meeting Tuesday at 9:30, whether you're Tuesday or Thursday, it's Tuesday, right? And if you could, as you leave, just say thank you to our guest speaker would be awesome. But you're welcome to leave and have a great weekend, everybody.
Oh, day today. Like, you're the first generation that's not going to have a snow day. I am so sorry about that. So thank you all for showing up. I probably wouldn't have, but more power to you kids. So good luck.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a
All
good
right,
day.
bye, Miss Riley.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.